Hey guys, welcome to Forensic Science. This is chapter 1. In this chapter, we'll go through some history of forensic science, the development of crime labs, what skills a forensic scientist can apply, the 5 basic services of crime labs, and also special services as well. All right, so let's get started here. In its broadest definition, forensic science is the application of science to criminal and civil laws. It wasn't always like that, and so over the years, science sort of became the standard. Is it scientific? Is it scientific? Is it scientific? The subject matter of this book emphasizes the application of science to those criminal and civil laws that are enforced by police agencies and the criminal justice system. So we have some, forensic fathers, and some of these people that we'll go through are Bertillon, Galton, Lattes, Goddard, and so on. And so these people sort of helped create what we have today as the forensic crime labs that we have today. So we have Orfila as the father of forensic toxicology. Bertillon devised the first scientific system for personal identification. Today we'll have fingerprints and eye prints and palm and feet and voice and so he's the first one. This was in 1879. Now, keep in mind, this is quite crude, still crude and primitive, but at least it's something. So he started with, all right, well, let's try to identify each person using measurements. So he would measure, criminals, say from head to toe, and then wingspan, and then head to rump, and so on. Okay, what's the size of their cranium? Measure the ears, and that sort of thing. So foot size. So you might think, well, this is quite rudimentary, and you'd be right, because a lot of people will have the same exact height and same exact wingspan and so on. But at least it's a start. It's a start to the scientific measurements that we have today. We also have Galton, who conducted the first definitive study of fingerprints and their classification. So this is pretty cool. We're going to get to this. Lattes developed blood typing from dried blood stains, which is quite in his days it was cutting edge. Goddard used comparison microscope to determine if a particular gun fired a bullet. Comparison microscope is one where you can look into, it's binocular, so you can look into a microscope with two eyepieces. However, the left one is looking at one specimen and the right one is looking at a different specimen. That way you can compare two objects at the same time. These are pretty expensive microscopes. And so that way you can look. You're basically looking at two specimens, say two gun shells, at the exact same time through different eyeballs. Now you could easily just set an object, two specimens just down on the stage, using a monocular microscope, but comparing it using only allowing one eye to see one thing and one eye to see another thing definitely helps when you're comparing. Osborne developed document examination principles. How do we, the standardization, what do we look for, and that sort of thing. McCrone utilized microscopy, again, microscopes, and other analytical methodologies to examine evidence. Gross wrote the first treatise describing the application of scientific principles to the field of criminal investigation. And so with these, you basically just memorize the name and sort of link the name to what they offered to forensic science. So you have Orfila, Bertillon, Galton, Lattes, Goddard, Osborne, McCrone, Gross, and Locard. Edmund Locard incorporated Gross principles within a workable crime laboratory. His principle, this Locard exchange principle, says when anyone comes in contact with an object or person, a cross transfer of evidence occurs. Basically, when you touch anything, I mean, right now you're touching something unless you were floating in midair. When you touch anything, there's a cross transfer of evidence. You sit down on a chair, you're sitting down right now, your pants are touching the chair. Today, we can actually take a sample of your pants and a sample of the chair and connect the two. We can determine that you were in fact sitting on that chair. It is actually quite interesting that today we are almost to the point where we can take a sample of your clothes and determine where you were in the world. Isn't that amazing? The dust that you find from state to state, from county to county, from city to city, even neighborhood to neighborhood, can be isolated and identified. Isn't that crazy? We can take the dust from anyone's house and narrow it down to that particular or from someone's person and narrow it down, because dust itself has fingerprints, and you can isolate and narrow it down to identify a particular maybe not a particular home, but a particular county or city or even neighborhood. All right, so now we're going to kind of get into crime labs. Crime labs are increasing in number ever since the Supreme Court's decision in the 60s, making them responsible for police placing greater emphasis on scientifically evaluated evidence. Is it scientific? Also, crime laboratories inundated with with drug specimens due to accelerated drug abuse and the advent of DNA profiling. The development of crime laboratories in the U.S. has been characterized by rapid growth, accompanied by a lack of national and regional planning and coordination. So, as you know, through the 60s and 70s and 80s, there really wasn't standardization, and states sort of just kind of did what they did. There wasn't much communication and much standardization. Today, we have 411 and counting public crime labs that operate at various levels of the government, like federal, state, county, and city as well. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of we'll talk about the 5 basic services that crime labs generally have. First is the physical science unit. All right, what is physical science? Physics. We're talking about chemistry, physics, geology to identify and compare physical evidence. So we'll use these different sciences to compare physical evidence. The biology unit, so we have the physics unit. The biology unit applies knowledge of biology, like blood samples, body fluids, hair, fibers. And since this course is within the biology department, we will go heavy on this particular unit. We'll study lots of the biology unit applications. You got the firearms unit. We will also go into firearms, which is pretty fun. So investigating bullets and cartridge cases and gunshot shells and that kind of thing, ammunition. Then you have the document unit. So studying handwriting analysis and being able to determine what pens were used in handwriting and that sort of thing. And then you have the photographic unit. And this is sort of self-explanatory. And each of these services can be done by when you go. If you decide you want to go into forensics, you can just get training. I mean, you can get training in one of these services, say in photography, and down the road, after say 6 months of training, you want to sort of expand your options and make yourself more marketable. You can do other types of trainings. You can get good at document training, biology, firearms. You don't have to have a particular, especially if you're already a police officer. Forensic scientists today could basically just have a degree in chemistry or in physics or in biology, a bachelor's of some sort. Basically, you are, as a forensic scientist, you're going to be one of those or a police officer. And then if you're a police officer, so you went to school for law, you didn't go to school for any of those other sciences, well, then you get training. You train for a year on photography, you train a year on crime scene, and so on. So there's a lot of training involved. Training. You learn how to do these different services, and kind of make yourself more marketable that way. Now there are also optional services like toxicology and fingerprinting, polygraph. Not all labs have all services. So, for example, we have the St. Paul Forensics Unit in St. Paul. There is in Minneapolis. You have the laboratory unit in Minneapolis, and there's the BCA in St. Paul. In Minnesota, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and so not every lab can do, just like in the movies. You watch in the movies how you got to take, if you want to identify something and you need a particular service, it had to be sent to it had to be sent to this lab or this lab or this, depending on what manpower they have and what services they have, what equipment they have, that sort of thing. There's also voice print, evidence collection unit, which will send out people to the crime scene and collect and preserve physical evidence. Okay, and so we're already about halfway done with this chapter here. So it's very important as in forensic science to understand the scientific method. This scientific method is used for across the board all sciences when trying to answer a question. First thing you do is you make a question, you formulate a question worthy of investigation, something that hasn't been asked already. Then you formulate a reasonable hypothesis to answer that question based on your initial question. Then you set up an experiment to test your hypothesis to answer the first question. And this is through experimentation, through your experiment. And then, upon validation of this hypothesis, it becomes suitable as scientific evidence. So then you ask yourself, so then you look at the data and you say, okay, does my data support my original hypothesis, or does it not support my hypothesis? If it doesn't support, then I go back and ask myself another question and come up with another experiment and go through those trials, and then I go back and then you ask yourself again, okay, does the data support or not support my original hypothesis? A forensic scientist must be skilled in applying the principles and techniques of the physical evidence and natural sciences to the analysis of the many types of evidence that may be recovered during a criminal investigation. This person may also provide expert court testimony. An expert witness is a person who the court determines to possess knowledge relevant to the trial that is not expected of your average person. That's what a witness expert is. This person is called on to evaluate evidence based on specialized training that they've had and experience that they've had, that the court lacks the expertise to do so, and they will then express their opinion as to the significance of the finding. Expert witness. For example, in this particular case, the necessity of the forensic scientist to appear in court has been imposed on the criminal justice system. In that particular, Fry versus the United States, the decision to set guidelines for determining the admissibility of scientific evidence into the courtroom was established in this particular case. So to meet what we call the Fry standard, the evidence in question must be generally accepted, in quotations, meaning basically the opinion of the scientific community is this, are we good with this or are we not good? So there's a lot of gray area. The Fry standard had a lot of gray area. However, in 1993, Daubert versus Morel Doe Pharmaceutical Incorporated, the U.S. Supreme Court asserted that the Fry standard is not an absolute prerequisite to the admissibility of scientific evidence. It shouldn't be black and white. There shouldn't be a lot of gray area. Trial judges were said to be the ultimate responsible gatekeepers. So now you're talking about, and this is another problem. You got judges that are basically saying, there's a lot of there. So as forensics grew and grew and grew, and crimes can continue to be committed, this is how today, this is how forensics has been developed based on, because of all the gray area and the lack of science that's being applied to crimes and investigations, basically. In the Daubert case, the Supreme Court offered some guidelines as to how a judge can gauge. So now we're getting a little bit better. Okay, like whether the scientific evidence, technique, or theory can be tested, whether the technique or theory has been subject to peer review and publication. So now we're getting like, okay, there's more scrutiny now. It's harder now, and there has to be a higher level of standard. The technique's potential rate of error. So now we're kind of getting into the more, how sciencey is really the question. How scientific. Existence and maintenance of standards controlling the technique's operation, and whether the scientific theory or method has attracted widespread acceptance across the U.S., across the globe. As a scientific community, are we accepting this method or not accepting this method? Okay, now we're going to talk about. So we're actually almost done here. So special forensic science services. A number of special services are available to law enforcement to sort of help the services of the crime laboratory. And these are like psychiatry, and engineering, that sort of thing, computer science, and these are even more specialized services that you might find in the in certain crime labs. For odontology, we study bite marks that are left on a victim, and then you can use those bite marks and make molds. Of course, photograph, make molds, and then when a suspect is brought into question, that person could be required to bite down on a mold, and then you can compare and make conclusions based on that science. And we also have forensic engineering and computer science. Okay, we're doing pretty good here. Doing pretty good. You also have the document unit, photographic unit. Okay, there's something that I wanted to show you that was actually quite interesting. Back in 2013, it came to light that, and let me read this here for you. 2 independent consultants hired to review the St. Paul Police Crime Lab found major errors in almost every area of the lab's work. This was really, really, really big back in 2013, including fingerprint, crime scene evidence processing that has continued after the lab's drug testing was stopped in July. The failures include sloppy documentation, dirty equipment, faulty techniques, and the ignorance of basic scientific procedures, according to reports released Thursday. Lab employees even used Wikipedia as a technical reference in at least one drug case. It sounds funny, but this was the case. So the St. Paul Forensic Unit lab basically shut down, and everything had to be revamped, and from like head to toe, completely gutted. Consultants found lab employees mistakenly classified at least 1/3 of all fingerprints as unidentifiable, and then so the evidence was just destroyed. Case files were largely unintelligible, basically, is what what the consultants found. The lab lacked any clean area designated for the review and collection of DNA evidence. The lab stored crime scene photos on a computer that anybody could access without a password. Conditions at the lab violated federal safety and health requirements. So I mean, just it was a big mess. However, consultants did not find lab employees intentionally mishandled cases or matched crime scene fingerprints to innocent people. So that was something good. The city of St. Paul hired the two consulting firms in August to review the St. Paul Police Lab's work. After lab employees testified in July that they did not follow any standard operating procedures and may have relied on contaminated equipment. The testimony threw thousands of drug convictions into question. A judge has yet to issue a ruling in the case that exposed the lab's faulty work. This was way back in 2013, and you can read this. It's on the web. So since then, if you look now, I mean, the whole forensics crime lab has been revamped, the entire thing from head to toe, and today, um, here's just the beginning, and here's now it's accredited by the ANSI, ASQ, National Accreditation Board, lots of accreditations. And look at all that the St. Paul Forensics Unit does, all the services: barrel length, crime scene processing, DNA collection, impression comparison, impression evidence processing, knife blade length determination, latent print comparison, latent print databasing, latent print processing, photography, presumptive blood testing, serial number restoration. It's pretty cool. Some people will file off serial numbers off of firearms to make them unidentifiable and untraceable. Yet we have the technology to make those numbers reappear, even though they've been filed off, because of the physics of metal. They can make it come back to life. Pretty interesting. So, all right. So that's all for chapter 1. Thank you guys for your patience and study up.